viral and reached millions. I read the introduction, so I'm going to start reading some more. So chapter 1. How to be a winner like Trump without being a loser like Trump. Plato anticipated the results of the 2016 presidential election more than 2 millennia ago. Around 380 BC, the famous Greek philosopher, a student of sauerkraut, a teacher of Aristotle, wrote a dialogue, Gorgas, about one of the first masters of persuasive speech or rhetoric. Plato called rhetoric the art of winning the soul by discourse. But in the digital age, rhetoric is more aptly called the art of creating content that go viral. Content that is both enticing and memorable, clicky and sticky. Plato gives Gorgas a speech that dramatizes the awesome power of rhetoric, a speech that foreshadowed much of modern American politics. Gorgas explains, if a rhetorician and a doctor visited any city in Greece and had to debate in front of the town leaders, the doctor would be nowhere. But the man who could speak would be chosen if he so wished. What he was saying is that a skilled speaker, a master salesman, could persuade any audience that he was more of a doctor than a real doctor. Cut to 2016. A master salesman who is unqualified to be president persuades just enough people that he should be chosen president over a woman who is highly qualified, but is as emotionally uncompelling and wonky as Gorgas, his imaginary doctor. Or maybe not so imaginary, since Gorgas' own brother was a doctor. Gorgas was a viral communicator in the family. Gorgas told of seeing patients refuse his brother's medicine or the application of a knife. Yet Gorgas wasn't able to convince them to accept the treatment just by the use of rhetoric. No wonder a master of viral, figurative speech like Trump can persuade people to do for him what they would not do for so many other candidates. Vote. That's why I blogged in March 2016. If he wins the GOP nomination, it will be in large part because of his mastery of rhetoric. Did you know there is a figure of speech that allows you to lie and exaggerate and say absurdities? Mexico must pay for the wall, or the concept of global warming was created by and for the Chinese, while actually making many people believe you are a genuine and truthful person. Donald Trump does. How many modern politicians can you name that have been intentionally using key figures of speech for over 3 decades? In Trump's case, one of his favorite figures is hyperbole, or rather, truthful hyperbole, as he labels it in his 1987 bestseller, The Art of the Deal. The final key to the way I promote is bravado. I play to people's fantasies. People may not always think big themselves, but they can still get very excited by those who do. That's why a little hyperbole never hurts. People want to believe that something is the biggest and the greatest and the most spectacular. I call it truthful hyperbole. It's an innocent form of exaggeration and a very effective form of promotion. It's an effective form of lying while accusing and rationalizing your lies. But the hyperbole Trump is using 3 decades later isn't innocent at all. Why? For one thing, it seems like Trump is incapable of not using hyperbole, of not lying to embellish a story. While this may have been a winning strategy during the Anything Goes campaign, it is a losing strategy when you are the commander-in-chief of the world's most powerful country. Trump's incessant use of hyperbole, such as his infamous and easily disproven exaggeration, the overall audience was, I think, the biggest ever to watch an inauguration address, has mainly served to make him an embarrassment, if not a laughingstock. Also, a key purpose of hyperbole is to express the emotions of anger. As Aristotle explained in his classic work, Rhetoric, the first in-depth study of the art, Aristotle notes that hyperboles show vehemence of character, and this is why angry people use them more than other people. When Trump makes wildly over-the-top claims, such as he's going to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it, it has no effect on his supporters to point out this is hyperbolic nonsense. Quite the reverse. Trump's claim moves them emotionally and persuades them precisely because it is a hyperbolic nonsense. They're angry, and he's showing that he is angry too, which is vastly more effective than the bland assertions by the professional politicians that they understand there's a lot of anger out there and they have policies to make things better. Like Gregor's, Trump is a master of narrative and the figures of speech, which are building blocks of emotional, compelling storytelling. Research shows that stories and content that evoke specific high arousal emotions, positive emotions like awe, or negative ones like anger or anxiety, are more viral. As researchers Jonah Berger and Catherine Milkman explained in a 2012 Journal of Marketing Research study, such stories move people to share content. Trump is a master of going viral because he is a master of using figurative language to arouse strong positive and negative emotions in people. During the campaign, scholars pointed out Trump's use of many different figures of speech behind hyperbole. Far more figures used, far more often than any other manager candidate. He's been called a brilliant master of rhetoric. Is Trump's use of the figures intentional or simply his natural speaking style after decades of marketing and branding himself? The answer is, it doesn't matter. Aristotle's key point, and indeed the point of considerable modern social science research, is that regular people talking using the figures of speech, he explains the aptness of language is one thing that makes people believe in the truth of your story. Aristotle continues. Their mind draw the false conclusion that you are to be trusted from the fact that others behave as you do when things are as you describe them, and therefore they take your story to be true, whether it is so or not. Besides, an emotional speaker always makes his audience feel with him, even when there is nothing in his arguments, which is why many speakers try to overwhelm their audience by mere noise. Trump sounds more sincere than his political opponents because he sounds more human. He haphazard aptness of language. It is a great irony to use another figure of speech that transparent hyperbole lies actually help make people believe in the truth of Trump's story. The so-called intelligence repeatedly mocks Trumps for speaking the way most people do, for using simple language, for repeating himself over and over, and for speaking figuratively rather than logically. Yet masters of rhetoric and the greatest speech makers have influenced us with the same strategies, from Jesus to Lincoln to our modern-day bards and marketing gurus. Shakespeare and the great rhetoricians of the past, like rigorous and Cicero, new and regular use some 200 figures of speech. Equally important, they knew which figures expressed which kind of emotion and when to use them to get the desired emotional effect. Your language will be appropriate if it expresses emotion and character, explained Aristotle in Rhetoric. To express emotion, you'll employ the language of anger in speaking of outrage, the language of disgust and discreet reluctance to utter a word when speaking of impiety or foulness, the language of exultation for a tale of glory. Trump loves the rhetoric device of phony reluctance to utter a word or phrase. She's just said a terrible thing. You know what she said? Shout it out, because I don't want to say it. Okay, you're not allowed to say it. I never expect to hear that from you again. She said, I never expect to hear that from you again. She said, he's a pussy. That's a terrible, this figures. Apostasy, from the Greek word for to deny. Emphasize the point for pretending to deny it. Stresses an idea or image by saying you don't want to discuss it, as with Trump's use of pussy, a favorite accessory. I will not even mention the fact that you betrayed us in the Roman people by eating cattle in 63 BC. It is also called a parallelis, from a Greek word for a mission. Apophases is perhaps the most important figure of seduction. The term I used in my 2000 book Language Intelligence for the figures that are most duplicitous. Trump is a master of phony denial. He is more Cicerone than Cicerone himself. I was going to say dummy. Bush, I won't say it. I won't say it. I refuse to call Megyn Kelly a bimbo because that would not be politically correct. Unlike others, I never attacked Dopey John Stewart for his phony last name. Would never do that. I promised I would not say that she, Carly Fiorelli, ran Hewlett Packard into the ground. That she laid off tens of thousands of people and she got viciously fired. I said I will not say it, so I will not say it. You may be thinking, but Trump was a terrible candidate, widely despised and viewed as unqualified. So what value were all these language skills? Indeed, he was inarguably a terrible candidate in many respects. One of the most unpopular ever to run for the office. But a presidential election is an extended debate and a popularity contest between individuals. Trump didn't have to prove he'd be a great Republican nominee for president, only that he was better than the alternatives by a plurality of votes. And once he had the job nomination, Trump didn't have to prove that he was a good choice to be president to a major of voters. He just had to persuade enough people to the right states that he was a better choice than Clinton, or, depending on the target audience, that they were both such poor choices, a lukewarm Clinton voter should vote for a third party or not vote at all. After all, McGregor said he could persuade a city assembly that he should be chosen as doctor over a real doctor. He was commenting not only on his mastery of figurative speaking, but also on the literal mindedness of scientifically inclined people. That would be an apt description of Hillary Clinton, who, as Politico reported in July 2016, is known for taking a draft of speech and changing it to some indelible way to make it more literal and less readable. Politico reveals one campaign joke was that she turned the figurative and memorable slogan, "If you see something, say something," into the more literal-minded and hence easily forgotten. If you see something, alert the proper authorities. That is funny, but also fatal. Clinton is part of a long line of wonky literalists the Democrats keep nominating who inevitably disappoint supporters when they underperform, especially when they are running against a vastly superior communicator. An election is not some abstract logical exercise in determining the truth of who is most qualified or who has the best policies. Most voters, especially those who aren't hardcore persons, do not have the time or interest to assess which policies are superior for various complex social problems such as health care or poverty or terrorism or the opiate epidemic. And even if they did, they'd still have to figure out whether they believe the candidates are even going to seriously try to keep their promises, and if so, will they actually be skilled enough to put those policies in place? That's a whole lot of deliberative thinking and a whole lot of metabolic energy and a whole lot of time to invest. Again, humans developed mental shortcuts to avoid all that. The shortcuts allow you to quickly figure out whether someone is in your tribe and on your side. But most important, the shortcuts allow you to quickly figure out if people are believable and emotionally compelling. If their words have the ring of truth to them. The most codified collection of shortcuts. The most time-tested are stories and their key elements, the figures of speech. Rhetoric was developed for winning public debates. The word itself comes from the ancient Greek rhetorics concerning public speech and rhetoric, public speaker. In ancient Athens, all citizens needed to excel at public speaking because every citizen was required by Greek law to speak in his own behalf in court. As Athens grew in size in the 5th and 4th century BC and endeavored to democratize its courts, it moved from trial by magistrate to a trial by jury, a very large jury. But there was no public prosecutor, and the person who presided over the trial had no power of control or instruction, notes George Kennedy in the book, The Art of Persuasion in Greece. Your accuser spoke without any restrictions for perhaps a half hour, and then you did the same. Sometimes there was one opportunity for a rebuttal. After that, a jury of some 400 or 500 decided your fate by majority vote. The popular and unprofessional nature of the jury much relaxed the need for logical, relevant treatment of points of law, explained Kennedy, and increased opportunity